So we've been looking at a lot of foreign policy news and how that affects Canada domestically, but I want to switch it up and talk about what's going on in Canada and how that will affect our foreign policy, our international relations, and what the everyday effects on Canadians will be. Now, to do that, I'm going to look at some of the political parties and what they've been talking about, but I do want to start specifically with the NDP because they have a policy convention this week. Now, policy resolutions that are debated at the convention don't always pass, and even if they do pass, it doesn't mean that they're going to make it into an election platform. But there's a lot of really interesting resolutions that I think are important for Canadians to understand. Now, the first one I want to start off with is one that Jagmeet Singh has personally come out against, but it's apparently still on the docket, and it is the defunding of the Canadian military. So basically defunding and disbanding the Canadian military. It's unclear what domestic force, if any, there's going to be left, but defunding the military would obviously mean that we cannot take part in international peacekeeping operations. We can't really even defend ourselves. We can't maybe enforce Arctic sovereignty. Again, it's not clear what that's going to look like, but this is a very large one because hard power compared to soft power, the diplomatic or financial power, hard power, military power is obviously something that is in the diplomatic toolbox. If you suddenly get rid of that, you have less options and therefore you have less ways to advance your strategic interests as a nation. They're also very against, for example, free trade deals that they view as bad, such as CETA and TPPA. Now, this one is again quite interesting because compared to Justin Trudeau, which is very big on international agreements, international organizations, they are very against this. And so they will not support anything that they view as harming Canadian workers. But again, if we're in another situation where the NDP holds the balance of power, if we would have just had an election, or maybe, if they're threatening an election, will the NDP actually go and pull the trigger and end the government? That's a very big question. So far, they haven't. And so that's why the Liberal government has stayed in power. But it's, again, something that is on their platform and something that could change should the NDP once again hold the balance of power or even get elected again if there is an election. The other big one for the NDP is re-engaging with Iran. And that is obviously going to be led by the Biden administration. That is ongoing right now. But the effects for Canada could be large. We basically don't have the level of diplomatic relations you might think. We closed down the embassy. And so there's, I think, just some low-level things going on through the British embassy in Iran. You can still get some consular services there, but that is not the level which you can expect to see, especially if the Biden administration chooses to re-engage with them. You can obviously see Canada following suit, and that is something that is supported by the NDP and would most likely be supported by the Liberals as well. Again, going along with the sort of international view, international focus that they have. When it comes to the Liberals specifically, one of the things you can imagine would be, again, if there's some international agreements or international accords like the Migration Compact or the Paris Climate Change Accords, there might be something new on the horizon. Might be something about the global reset. Again, there was a lot of controversy about that, so not getting into that, but talk of this global reset or the new global economy, universal basic income, or agreements with other countries about some sort of basic corporate tax. These obviously would have a very huge effect on Canada because if we're going to institute some minimum corporate tax or we're going to agree to some other agreement that is going to maybe institute a carbon tax or, banning plastics or any of these type of things that could be on the horizon, that is going to have a huge effect. Now, this is, again, critically important because 53% of Canadians are very close to insolvency. And so if you're going to rock and shake the economy, it could push people into insolvency. That is going to have a domino effect. And that 53% could very quickly turn into, 60, 70, 80, 90%, who knows, because people in the economy are obviously dependent on another. People are dependent on the customers, dependent on the suppliers. And so that is going to have huge effects. Now, the last one that I want to sort of touch on before I briefly touch on some of the minor parties is the Conservative Party, and their big issue was tough talk on China. Now, this is complicated by the fact that they're not in power, so they can talk tough on China, but if the government is going to take a tough stance, it really puts them in a bind because there's only a limit of how tough you can push to be on China. If the, for example, the two Michaels get released because the government took a tough stance, it's really going to put them out of talking points. There might be still something about trade, but it's really going to make things more difficult. Now, China has obviously been issuing statements that are increasingly tougher on Canada as well. And so that is something that they will have to find a balance on between pushing for a tough stance on China or perhaps continuing to, or, maybe not, maybe they'll give it up, but pushing for a tougher stance on China while balancing out the fact that the Liberals may have to do that as well because they're simply going to be forced to. The other big one for them is going to be, again, opposite from the Liberals, will be foreign aid. They have said that they're not going to cut foreign aid, and this is something that was on the docket for Andrew Scheer. It is apparently not for Aaron O'Toole, and so this is something that you might expect to see should the Conservatives come into power. How they're going to handle this foreign aid situation again, especially in light of the economic situation here at home. Canadians might be very upset, and people might really choose to be not supportive of the Conservatives because of promises like this. It might make it a very difficult task for them. So, again, remains to be seen. The other parties, the Green Party had, interestingly enough, a big focus on the military, that they wanted to provide them with the appropriate equipment and training. That was quite interesting. The Bloc doesn't have all too much except for clamping down on Roxham Road, but that's more COVID related. So keeping the spread out from the United States, where there were previously high cases. That may change again once the United States is more fully vaccinated or reaches herd immunity. The People's Party, a lot of stuff on their website foreign policy wise, but they don't have any seats. So that, again, they have a lot of maybe interesting ideas that you might support even, but if they're not in power, they don't really have a way to influence that, and they're having a lot of difficulties affecting the conversation simply because a lot of the mainstream media is ignoring them. So that is obviously a challenge for the People's Party. So where does that leave us? Again, it really gives us some insight into what might happen if there is an election. I think that if there is another minority and one of the other parties, or the NDP again holds the balance of power, they could vote for a number of interesting things. The most important idea or thing that is going on right now is the economy, and I think a lot of Canadians are rightfully concerned. So I think that should remain the focus. But again, we'll see what happens and what the election is going to look like, what the next few weeks will hold for us following these policy conventions. Will, I'm sure, keep you guys updated. So for True North, I am Sam Eskenasi. Thank you so much for watching, and have yourselves a great day.